It's the week ending Saturday, the 11th of November, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen Priti Patel resigning over unofficial meetings in Israel, the release of thousands of leaked papers detailing offshore tax arrangements for the rich and powerful, and Twitter increasing its limit to 280 characters for some reason. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me from the week's digital team are Arion McNicoll and Jamie Timson, and from the week junior, it's Felicity Capon. And starting the show this week, it's Jamie. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
This week, the forecast was Saudi with a chance of pain.
Saad al-Hariri is not free. He's not doing this out of his free will. This was an imposed resignation by the Saudis, which is a very, very dangerous step. But they have been able to get away with it by basically kidnapping a sitting prime minister of another country and forcing him to resign, and forcing him and keeping him in detention in the Ritz-Carlton, and deciding what's going to happen in Lebanon. All the indications says that they will bomb Lebanon through flying over Jordan and parts of Syria to bomb parts of Lebanon. And we might see this happening over the next few days.
So you really believe we're on the brink of war at this very moment?
Yes.
Ali Al-Ahmed, director of the Institute for Gulf Affairs, speaking to Russia Today America this week. Jamie, what is going on in Saudi Arabia, and why haven't we all heard much more about it?
Good question.
Thanks.
Not to turn this into an Adam Curtis documentary, but if we just run through the background very quickly.
Fine. We've only got 40 minutes max.
For decades, Sunni-led Saudi Arabia and Shia Iran have duelled for dominance in the Middle East through a kind of variety of proxy wars involving kind of opposing factions in Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and previously Lebanon. More recently this week, the leader of Lebanon, Hariri, has, it seems, been forced to resign by the Saudi crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. The thing to know about bin Salman is that he's young, much younger than the previous Saudi leaders. And so the pace of kind of change in Saudi Arabia has been pretty much glacial, kind of covered by the fact that they've got lots of oil and they can just use that as an example. To give you an example, 70% now of the country is under the age of 30. And roughly 25% of them are unemployed. There's 200,000 of them that are studying abroad, and about every year, about 35,000 of them come home with degrees looking for meaningful work that's not involved in involving oil. And the new crown prince, his big move has been to say, we're going to try and liberalize things a bit more and kind of give a sense of the kind of 21st century to Saudi Arabia. There's a big but. It seems that this liberal rhetoric is seemingly masking a kind of centralization of power. He recently, just this week actually, in fact, locked up 11 quite high-ranking, formerly ministers and business people under the auspices of corruption.
Some of whom he's related to.
And the idea before with Saudi Arabia was that it was governed by a group of families and they decide together. But as the Thomas Friedman in the New York Times said this week, it's no longer seemingly Saudi Arabia, but Salman Arabia, which is the surname of the leading family.
Get it.
It's good.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. I thought it was clever.
Yeah. Okay. And so what? Okay. So it sounds
yes.
like a good thing. You know, he's making it slightly
he's
more liberal, which isn't difficult
women
in Saudi
drive.
Arabia.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, for the populace who are there who are younger. But there's a bad thing, which is maybe he's centralizing power. But so what?
This week, with the resignation of the Lebanese leader, it feels like we're moving towards away from proxy wars and more towards actual wars with Iran, particularly in Lebanon, where the Iranian-backed group Hezbollah have really started ratcheting up the pressure on kind of Hariri resigned, the Lebanon leader, prime minister leader, saying that he feared assassination by Hezbollah, which is what happened to his father. Outside analysts seem to see it as a kind of Saudi pressure to really squeeze the pressure on Hezbollah. And ultimately, the Saudis have already declared that Iran fired a missile or gave a missile to Yemen to fire at Riyadh. So there already seems to be this kind of rush to war. which it seems or it has the ability to seem is being backed by America and Israel. Because America and Israel, Trump particularly, is now very anti-Iran.
And Trump's been very pro-Saudi, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Although people have said that's because they're going to potentially float their petrol on the New York Stock Exchange.
Aramco.
Arion, is Jamie right? Are we heading to another war in the Middle East, or is he just sort of inflating this beyond all measure?
I don't think it's impossible that we'll see war in the Middle East.
But we did have to find a clip from Russia Today America to back up his argument.
I couldn't believe there was a Russia Today America.
Exactly.
It does seem a
So how
contradiction in
serious
terms.
is this argument?
The question is whether it's going to be possible for Saudi Arabia to make the kinds of impact on Hezbollah that they think they are going to be able to by this maneuver. It's still unclear whether Hariri quit because he just wanted to quit and he wasn't getting his agenda through the parliament, which was still fairly fledgling, or whether his hand was actually guided by Saudi Arabia. But even if it was, and even if Saudi's intention was to try to unsettle Hezbollah, they're so much more powerful than even, say, 2006 when they drove out Israel after 33 days of war. And they're also much more embedded in politics. They're not just a military force, they're also part of the Lebanese government. So it's unclear whether this is going to result in war necessarily, also because Iran's not going to take the bait.
I think the threat of war is certainly linked to the so-called purge of the princes. I think the removal of Prince Miteb bin Abdullah, who is commander of the Saudi Arabian National Guard, is obviously very telling. All the rest put together has really sort of cemented MBS, as I think the West like to call him, MBS, rather trendy, his dominance over sort of military, foreign, internal security, economic and social affairs. So he is really sort of cementing his power, leaving himself free to pursue a more aggressive confrontation with Iran. And I think, ostensibly these seem like there's some kind of social revolution going on in Saudi Arabia, and a lot of really good things in terms of women's rights and clamping down on corruption ostensibly. But actually the backdrop is far more volatile, and it really depends on what MBS wants. And I think the sort of power play in the region at the moment, if you look at Saudi Arabia, it's not doing so well. Economy's flatlined, low oil prices. The war in Yemen is basically a quagmire, and Saudi hasn't really made any advances or got what it wants. And the blockade of Qatar, I think, was sort of roundly seen as a bit of a disaster. So I think it depends what he wants to do. And I think if these purges are part of a wider thing to seize power, then that could be quite worrying. But I think Jamie's point about the Saudi population, 70% being less than 30 years old, they're furious with corruption, all that sort of thing. It depends what MBS wants to do and how much he wants to appease them and how much the general consensus is wanting war, which I doubt it really is.
But also, if you have money in Saudi Arabia, you say they're furious with corruption. I mean, you just pay your way out of whatever you want, don't you? And then you can drive your car as fast as you want, and you can commit whatever crimes you like, and you can drink and do everything else. So, I mean, actually, do the young people that matter in Saudi Arabia, the ones with the money, do they really want things to change anyway?
I think corruption as well, the idea of arresting people in corruption in Saudi Arabia is a huge smokescreen. If you started doing that, you'd probably arrest everyone. They haven't got these big rules in terms of what's fair and what's right. I think
I suppose there's no constitution, is there? So,
no, yeah. So
it's not even unconstitutional to do this, really.
You can pretty much do what you like. And so the corruption is, I think, a smokescreen for him centralizing power. I think the key thing is, for me at least, is the role of Trump in this. Obama was very keen not to pick sides in Saudi Arabia between MBS and his cousin, who was the former heir apparent. Obama didn't really want to upset the apple cart. He also didn't really want the Gulf to be in this situation, whereas Trump doesn't seem to have so much of a regard for stability.
After 9/11, it was kind of impossible to publicly be championing Saudi Arabia, wasn't it? The American attitude seemed to be, well, let's pretend it all emanated from Afghanistan and forget about Saudi Arabia.
Bin Laden's family over in the quiet.
All of that, but I mean, the point was, it would have been very politically difficult. Enough time, arguably, has now passed that Trump, clearly a friend of Israel and a hater of Iran, can reach out and say, well, we have some common ground with the Saudis in a way that actually probably Bush would have liked to, but obviously couldn't.
Even if there isn't some sort of direct bribery being done, I think that the Saudis learnt the lesson that a bunch of other world leaders have learnt, apparently, which is that you flatter Trump and he kind of rolls over and does what you would like him to do. And that's what you've seen across his Asian tour this week, as that, he rocks up and Abe gives him a hat that says we're best pals, and Xi takes him out to dinner and wines and dines him. And he likes people who like him. And
gives him a hat. What does it decide to miss the hat? Was it make South Korea great again?
It's a princess hat.
Reference to people that were in the room.
The hat it said something like Shinzo Abe and Donald Trump make relationship even greater. It was one of those sort of hilarious, poorly translated things, and it was also an enormous thing to try to put on a hat. Anyway.
I was just going to say that I think Jared Kushner actually is probably, in terms of high-profile Americans dealing with Saudi Arabia, probably the one to watch. I mean, I think he's supposed to be pretty good mates with MBS, and I think they stay up into the wee hours of the morning in Riyadh discussing all sorts of things. And I do think it's interesting that Jared Kushner is obviously married to Ivanka, and she, to all intents and purposes, is a big feminist and pro-women campaigner, and MBS is bringing in these changes, which actually, I know we're talking about war and all that, but they're not insignificant. I think the fact that he's reaching out to sections of the population that so far have just been completely marginalised, I think is pretty interesting, actually.
One of the detained is Prince Alaouid bin Talal.
He's just so my favourite person ever.
He's your favourite Saudi. Let's play top trumps.
I was reading a profile about him. He has 3 palaces. In one of the grounds of his palaces, he's created a Grand Canyon for himself personally. His wealth is just unimaginable. He's mates with Prince Charles.
Now,
I mean, what more do you want in life?
Well, you want not to be detained in Saudi Arabia, I suspect.
But he's at Ritz-Carlton. I mean, that's not a bad place to
not
be
a bad
detained.
prison.
One of the worst prisons.
He is one of the investors in Twitter and 21st Century Fox. This is how he's made, aside from the oil and the inherited billions, how he's made so much of his money. So what does it mean for the American corporations, do you think, that their relationship with him might be under scrutiny now?
I mean, I think it's problematic generally that in the first half of the year, MBS should be announcing his Vision 2030 and saying that we're trying to diversify from oil. And then in the second half of the year, he's arresting his political rivals and economic rivals and all, anyone who's opposed him. For anyone thinking about trying to do business in Saudi Arabia, that this would have to be a warning sign, wouldn't it? That you're not necessarily going to be safe setting up shop here.
He just announced the NEOM, which is their equivalent of Dubai in Saudi Arabia, that they were wanting to set up as this kind of huge new city that was going to get lots of foreign investment, and he was really open for it. On the one hand, while seemingly opening the door, he talked a lot about the revolution in 1979 and really staunchly seemed to be going towards the same kind of Wahhabism vibe that the Saudi Arabians have been a part of for the past 30 years, to go back to Adam Curtis again. There is a feeling that, considering that 10% of the country is Shiite, for MBS to continue to be so anti-Shiite and seemingly so pro all of the same issues that have come up again and again in Saudi Arabia, it's a worry, because Western people aren't going to want to invest in a place that could be at any moment seemingly about to strike up in civil war.
Arion, you're next. What do you think this week will be remembered for?
I'm wondering whether this is the beginning of the end for the fledgling political philosophy known as Trumpism.
To every person, bring it down, to every person who's ever been singled out, who's ever been stigmatized, who's ever been the misfit, who's ever been the kid in the corner, who's ever needed someone to stand up for them when they didn't have a voice of their own because there's no one else who is with them. This one's for you. And this one is for, most importantly, the people of Haymarket, Gainesville, Manassas.
Danica Roem speaking to supporters after her election to Virginia's 13th District House of Delegates seat, which Arion makes her the state's first transgender legislator. This is actual news, Arion, that you've chosen for this week. I'm already on your side. This does feel like a significant moment.
Yeah, I think it is big news this week, and it's first and foremost, it's a lovely symbolic victory for Danica Roem, who defeated the Republican candidate Bob Marshall, who called himself the homophobe in chief. So, there's a sort of unpleasantness to his candidacy in the first place. And he spent the entire campaign referring to her by the incorrect pronoun, calling her him instead of her, and was generally an unpleasant character. And so it's nice to have seen her defeat him in that sense.
Except then you kind of think, well, did she win because she's transgendered and was up against Bob Marshall, rather than, it being incidental to the fact that she's a politician?
From what I've sort of read about it, it seems that actually she ran an incredibly sensible campaign that really targeted the key gripes that her people had. So I think the main thing is the transport infrastructure. There's this highway that they all absolutely hate, and she focused on that. And all he could focus on was bizarre social policy, you know, the bathroom bill that everyone absolutely thinks is the most nuts thing ever. And she was going for...
Talk us through the bathroom bill for those who haven't been
The bathroom bill is that he believes that transgender people should only go to the loo that corresponds with the gender on their birth certificate, which is really controversial and I think probably quite offensive for a lot of transgender people. So he was focusing on these kind of quite...
It's also unpoliceable, isn't it? You're not going to carry around your birth certificate with you if you look like a woman,
yeah,
then you're a woman.
It's ridiculous. But I think what she was focusing on was sort of creating jobs and fixing the traffic and raising teacher salary. And I think she obviously didn't shy away from the fact that she was transgender. And actually, I think she got a lot of donations from LGBT groups. And I think that's also quite important. And she's obviously very proud of who she is, and rightly so. And I'm sure that attracted a lot of people. But I think actually you could argue here that it was the real pressing concerns of people that won the day. She ran a fantastic campaign. It wouldn't have mattered whether she was transgender or not. Bob Marshall is a nasty piece of work, but he just didn't have a great campaign either. So he probably needed one.
And I think that the other thing that is interesting is that the Republicans ran in Virginia broadly with these fairly nasty campaigns that were either racially or in terms of the gender, that they were designed to inflame tension. And they lost resoundingly on all levels. And I think that's the sort of broader thing that's going on here, that there's a real repudiation of Trump broadly. The crowning achievement for the Democrats this week was not only getting Danica Roem up, but also getting Ralph Northam elected as governor of Virginia. And he'd been battling a guy who really was coming down with these awful racially charged advertisements against him.
Jamie, would it be unwise, do you think, for the Democrats to learn the lesson from this, that the way to campaign for the next big thing, which is obviously the presidency, is to say Trump, assuming it will be him fighting for re-election, is focusing on the wrong things. He's focusing on social issues, as Arion and Felicity were saying, like Bob Marshall did, focusing on social issues that aren't important, you know, really in the grand scheme of things, building the wall, for instance, when he should be focusing on, I don't know, health or the economy, because Hillary did kind of try and do that and it didn't work for her.
I think that, this past year there's been so much looking back on Hillary Clinton, not least from her with her book, of what happened and what went wrong for them. And I think if you look at the results from this week, it seems that there are stark differences between the results from the election, not most pertinently among young people. In Virginia, that Arion was just talking about, the margins in Virginia last year for Clinton, she had a plus 18 rating against Donald Trump, but Northam got a plus 39. We know for a fact that young people really struggled with getting behind Clinton as a candidate. But also, this past year has shown them the problems with not voting.
There was a very good piece in Slate actually saying the kind of anti-Trump wave, it will come from women. And if Democrats do make significant gains, it will be women leading the fall, because they are so sick to the teeth of Trump's attacks, his comments, his attacks on Planned Parenthood, his attacks on reproductive rights. And I think women are galvanizing and saying, look, we need to do something about this. And it wasn't just Danica Roem. You've got Andrea Jenkins has become the first openly trans woman of color elected to a US public office. Seattle has got its first openly lesbian mayor. This week is really significant in terms of women leading the charge against Trump and saying we're not going to put up with this.
I think you're right, though, Olly, that there is a question for the Democrats about what this means in terms of their campaigns going forward, particularly in 2018. And then I guess 2020, there'll be a lot more information to draw from the elections to come. But Northam was a very centrist candidate, and obviously the Democrats themselves are trying to decide whether they want to go in a much further leftist direction to appeal to the Bernie crowd, say, or whether they want to occupy this center ground that has kind of been abandoned by the Republicans as they themselves have shuffled right. So they do have lessons to learn here, I'd say.
I think as well, interestingly about the centrist thing, there is a movement in America about the suburban vote. I read a very interesting article in June from Politico that talked about how the Republicans were losing suburbia for the first time in about 50 years. Trump did win in suburbia by 49% to 45%, but it was the third presidential election in a row where the GOP didn't manage to crack 50% of the suburban vote. And that is because the suburban vote is becoming more racially diverse. But I think also crucially, the suburban vote is centrist. and always has been.
Centrist by American standards,
centrist
which is more right than here.
Which is more right than here. But if you think about the ideals of suburbia, lots of ways in which that perhaps it didn't used to appeal to Democrats like Jimmy Carter, say, but the idea behind the suburban way of life, it was really tapped into by someone like Bill Clinton, and now actually could be really tapped into going forward by a centrist candidate.
I think the problem the Democrats have more broadly is that they don't actually have a candidate to go up against Trump. And I think if the election was rerun again right now and it was Hillary Clinton, I think Trump would still beat her hands down. And until they find someone who can, obviously there are tons of candidates and there are tons of people who can do it, but until they have found someone to replace Hillary Clinton and put up a good fight, I think Trump would. He's still got enough support, really.
Should the general tactic be find someone and senators and governors underneath them who are more serious about issues and more credible, or is it actually trying to match him like for like in terms of celebrity status and soundbite delivery?
Well, I think if Danica Rome's got anything to show for, it's going for things that really affect ordinary Americans and going for the things like teacher salaries and healthcare. That this is what people care about. I think all the kind of
and getting the vote out in the way that Obama did. I think that's important. Like, you know, getting the vote out in areas. It doesn't really matter who the candidate is, but persuading more young people to vote, persuading more minorities to vote. You know, there's lots to be written about how Hillary Clinton didn't quite get the vote out in key areas. I think that needs to be a tactic. They need to look at the way that the Republicans did manage to get new voters. The amount of new voters that voted for Donald Trump, like, that was shocking. That was the reason that no one could predict it. So I feel like that's got to be a tactic.
And I think that Rome did a really good job of that door knocking and going and meeting people and finding the issues that local communities care about. On the other hand, a presidential campaign requires a different kind of tactic. And you're right to ask the question, what do you attack Trump on? There's a really good podcast, Pod Save America, where they're asking these exact questions. It's a bunch of former Obama staffers who have turned into a kind of big deal over in the States, left-wing heroes. But their big question is, how do we take on Trump? And I don't think there's a really clear answer. One of the things that they think is we need one single message. But what that message is, it's not yet clear, because Trump is such a scattergun of chaos. The things that are big now may not be at all big in 2020.
Felicity, you're finishing us off. What's your choice for the week?
Vogue is dead. Long live Vogue.
How would you define being black and British in the year 2017?
100% empowering and fabulous. You have it, there's this knowing and understanding that we're all in it together.
You know, growing up, there were just a few of us. There was me and probably Naomi Campbell, Pat. We knew we wanted to be in this industry. We knew what we had to say, and we just did it. Nobody was going to tell me that I didn't belong in this industry because there'd been no one like me before. So for me to watch all of you today, it's so incredible. It makes me feel so proud. So glad that, you know, for my first ever issue of British Vogue, you end up being the cover girl. Thank you for agreeing to do it.
Edward, oh God.
Yeah.
Sweetie darling, sweetie darling. British Vogue editor Edward Enninful in conversation with model Adwa Aboa this week. Felicity, exciting times at British Vogue.
Very exciting times.
Tell us what's happened.
Yeah, so British Vogue has a new editor, Edward Enninful, who replaces the outgoing Alexandra Shulman, who was in the top job for 25 years. And the first issue is out this week, which is pretty exciting. And I think what is so interesting about the story is that it seems like Vogue has undergone a complete transformation.
Okay, but why is it exciting?
Because I think it's undergone a huge makeover, basically. It looks like under Edward Enninful, everything, it's all changed from the start. The cover star is the mixed-race British model and feminist activist Adwa Aboa, and it looks like it's just going to be a lot of change in terms of their content and contributors as well. We've got not just Vogue making fashion statements anymore, it looks like it's going to start making really bold political statements. Well, maybe not that bold, but you've got Naomi Campbell interviewing Sadiq Khan. I'm not sure we've had a London mayor in the covers of Vogue. You've got Sadie Smith doing a profile about the Queen. The whole kind of focus seems to be about Great Britain, about re-establishing identity. It just seems like a total transformation for one of the most established, oldest titles in fashion.
Quite Brexit, really, isn't it? Great Britain, establishing our identity.
Now, that's very interesting, Jamie, because Felicity, some would say, and I was thinking when you were just saying, it's all very exciting because it's got this basically kind of multicultural, slightly more metropolitan and intelligent view. Yeah. But I was thinking, well, all that sounds a bit like Danny Boyle's opening ceremony from London 2012. So, I mean, it's nothing...
Which was great.
Yeah, fine. But,
It was the last time we were happy as a nation,
Exactly.
wasn't it?
The last time I felt proud.
fine. But it was 5 years ago. So actually, is it the case that Vogue's been slow to jump on that zeitgeist?
Oh, God, hugely slow. I think Vogue has been massively behind the times, and I think this is why this is such an exciting story. When I first sort of heard this story that NFL was going to make fashion diverse, I sort of raised a very finely plucked eyebrow to the whole story. I'm glad this is a podcast and no one can see what I'm wearing. You know, I was very skeptical, but actually I think the more I've looked into it, the more sort of exciting and revolutionary it does sound. You have to remember that Vogue, you know, has pretty extraordinary, had a 12-year stretch between 2002 and 2014 where not a single black model appeared on the cover. Vogue has always done exactly what it wants to do. It's always appealed to a very elite, exclusive clientele, shall we say, and now it looks like that's going to be broadened out. They're trying to reach a new audience. They're trying to do new, exciting things.
Okay, but is that a good thing, Arion, from a publishing point of view, bearing in mind, you know, one issue, yes, make a statement, make a splash. Actually, the narrow audience Felicity is describing are the audience who buy Yves Saint Laurent handbags. And, you know, that is a niche audience of people that can afford things, and they're not a mainstream broad audience.
I've been sort of wondering the same question, and I think the proof of his success is really going to be in the pudding on this one. Early signs are good. Apparently the first edition closed with 29% more net display revenue than the previous edition, so advertising is up. The next question will be, can he stem the decline? Because Vogue's own circulation has been on the way down. So what we really need to see, or what Vogue needs to see, is for more people to buy it. And will that be more than just a first issue excitement? Because holy moly, what a lineup of people on the cover.
Incredible.
Can he do that month after month?
I think also there's the question is that he's still part of the establishment. You know, he's very much Anna Wintour's prodigy. He was creative director at Love, which I think is a magazine, although don't quote me on it.
He was a model before that.
But he has been very much specifically chosen by Anna Wintour, it seems, to come through in that situation. There is also quite a lot of controversy around his appointment. Nearly 90% of those involved in the fashion manufacturing industry are women. Very few top jobs in fashion go to women. So to give the top job to a man was quite controversial. He has also been involved in things like this cover before. He was in 2008, there was the Vogue Italia black issue that he kind of championed and was behind the idea of, and it was full of black models and everything. And there were criticisms that actually, although the diversity, it was there, it was diversity for diversity's sake. They all looked still very quite similar. They all looked a kind of Caucasian-esque version of a black model. It wasn't celebrating different sizes. So there is a question about how much he is that different. You know, he comes from the same traditional industry, and does putting Skepta on your front cover really make you diverse, or is it just doing it for show?
I think he is quite different, actually. I think the Times called it the posh girl exodus, how he got rid of all these very established, well-known, I think Emily Sheffield, who is Sam Cam's sister, she was deputy editor, so a lot of them have gone. I think one of them said she was actually fired. It wasn't that they sort of left off their own accord. So he has been quite ruthless. There was a very famous photograph of Alexandra Shulman's Vogue crew, all completely white, and Naomi Campbell sort of had a bit of a stab with her stiletto heel and said, you know, great that we're ushering in a new era of a more diverse Vogue. So I think he is quite different. And I think he grew up in Ghana, he grew up in Ladbroke Grove, he's come from very humble backgrounds and done an awful lot to get where he is.
I'm sorry to sound so reductive about this, but will the women who buy Vogue to get advice on what lipstick they should buy that month, are they interested in this stuff?
Yes, I think they might be. I was cynical too, and I couldn't work out why on earth, if you turn to the fashion Bible to find out, you know, what the length of your skirt should be, why you'd want to hear what Sadiq Khan has to say about absolutely anything. But I do think there is a sort of trend now for sort of fashion mags to encroach a little bit more onto the political sphere. I think there's definitely an appetite for that. I think you've seen it with Teen Vogue. I think they're getting Hillary Clinton to do a guest edition. I know that Teen Vogue has had some difficulties, and a lot of the fashion mags are in difficulties. But I do think there is more of an appetite to see a glossy photo shoot and also find out, and because I think people want to do that. They want to look incredibly fashionable and stylish, but they also want to say something vaguely intelligent when they go to their fabulous dinner parties.
I think like shaking things up is always going to be a good thing. He clearly has an intention to shake things up, and ultimately Vogue has been stayed for such a long time, and maybe this is the kind of injection of interest that people need for this. But yeah, like you said, Arion, the proof will be in the pudding, because we'll have to just wait and see whether he achieves it.
And in fact, we won't know that until August next year, because that's when the next figures come out. So he's got a bit of time to work on
and presumably
the project.
Christmas must be their biggest selling issue, right? Oh, I mean, I know the September issue is famous in Vogue, but after that, it's got to be the Christmas issue, because that's when people are buying presents. So he's got a good chance of starting off at this time of year, hasn't he?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see whether he can maintain it. But he was a model himself as a teenager, and he is also, I mean, the other big thing, other than diversity in fashion, is obviously body weight, and the health of models has been a massive thing. And as a model himself, healthy body size and image is something that he definitely champions. I think also all the stuff going on with Terry Richardson right now, he's spoken openly about that. I think from what he's saying, it certainly sounds like he's going to give fashion the shake-up that it so desperately needs.
He hasn't approached me to do a cover. I think when he does, then we'll know that it's
shocked.
Truly diverse.
I'm absolutely shocked by this.
That is it from this edition of The Week Unwrapped. My thanks to Felicity Capon, Arion McNicoll and Jamie Timson. For more from The Week, why not visit theweek.co.uk, where you can also sign up to our free email newsletter, The Weekday, or you can have the magazine delivered direct to your door. Very exciting covers on that, usually cartoons. Just head to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. All the past episodes of this show are available on our podcast feed. Just search for The Week Unwrapped on your app of choice, or whatever you're using to listen to me right now in your ears. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio. Until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.